Welcome back to Camp Bucky and the fourth of my SRV driving tutorials in which we're going to take a look at mountain climbing. Before we start, I just want to illustrate a major difference with driving up slopes. So when we're driving along a level surface, you'll see that we only have to tilt forwards a tiny amount before the thrust from the SRV's boosters will start acting in our favour and begin accelerating the SRV forwards. And once more. Now, let's compare that with driving up a gradient. Here we need to tilt down at least as much as the gradient before we even break even, and then continue tilting beyond that to actually start making progress up the slope. Let's see that again. When we lift off, we first have to rotate level, and then rotate more to start pushing up the slope. And once more. Rotate level, and then rotate more to push up the slope. And if I turn the SRV sideways for a second, I can demonstrate another way to think about this. When we're on a slope, the initial burst of thrust will push us away from the ground, at which point gravity takes hold, and if we don't do something about it, we'll start to fall back down the slope. Push away from the ground, and we fall down the slope. And once more. Push away from the ground, and we start to fall back down the slope. So, facing uphill again, the instant we push away from the ground, we're going to start falling. We must tilt down at least as much as the gradient when we're boosting, just to hold our position. So, if you want to make any progress in the air when climbing a mountain, you're going to need to tilt down a lot further, and your forward speed is going to be a lot slower. Okay, back to Camp Bucky hill climb. Let's get rolling. So, on approach to a mountain, it's a good idea to try and get as much forward momentum as possible, as that will help to carry us a good way up the slope before it runs out. In many ways, the start of a climb is the same as level ground sliding. So we're still picking our bounce spots to avoid obstacles and hit kicker mounds, trying to hit them cleanly and with our wheels level to the ground. But as you travel further up and start to hit steeper and steeper gradients, you'll start to feel that pull of gravity. You'll also notice that the SRV's tendency to turn in directions you don't want it to will get worse the steeper the slope you're on. So your steering inputs will need to become more and more reactive to what's happening. Another thing that will happen is that unless you're going straight up, gravity will constantly be trying to pull you off course, so you'll need to make larger course corrections to counter that. As well as constantly fighting with the steering, you also hear that I'm working the throttle a lot more, slowing every time you feel like you're losing control, and accelerating every time you're back in control. At this point, we're going to move to the Devil's Tower on the same planet to demonstrate climbing a much steeper slope. Here we see the extreme tilting that's required in order for our thrusters to continue pushing us upwards, and also the way the steeper slope has a much stronger tendency to spin the SRV around. You can hear the engine starting to struggle now, and see how the rotation that's needed is getting so extreme that it's getting harder and harder to tilt and boost before we need to rotate level for the next bounce. Eventually, you're better off just driving. And there comes a point around 65 degrees for the Scarab and slightly more for the Scorpion, where you're no longer able to make any headway. At this point, turn perpendicular to the slope, put your handbrake on, and take stock for a second. What you now need to do is find a very gentle angle at which you can still traverse across the slope, driving extremely cautiously in order to hold this line. Avoid leaving the ground at all costs, as that will almost certainly send you plummeting back down the slope, as you can see here. If you start to roll backwards, then apply the handbrake, turn back across the slope, and come to a complete stop before continuing. What I'm doing here is picking a very careful line across the slope that's still making some progress upwards without being so steep that I grind to a halt. It helps to pick a contour ever so slightly above you as a goal. In this case, that slight ridgeline you can see up ahead. Gently, gently, and made it. Changes in contour like this will often provide an opportunity to turn back up the slope and take a run at the next bit. Be extra careful to land level before turning back into another gentle traversal stage across towards our next chosen goal a bit further up. With plenty of practice, there's that word again, there's pretty much no mountain that can't be climbed. I hope you found this video useful, and if you do have any further questions, feel free to put them in the comments below this video. I look forward to seeing some of you at the Drakhyr Rally on the 10th of August, where thankfully we won't be facing any mountains quite as steep as this one.